The death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip climbs to over 43,600 with over 103,000 wounded. The Lebanese death toll exceeds 3,280 with over 14,220 injured. And the European Union Council President says the EU is stepping up its climate financing with $31 billion. It's 10 minutes to 8 p.m. Cairo local time, and you're now watching Q News. We started with the latest developments in Gaza. Let's start with Gaza news, where the Gaza-based health authorities have announced that the death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip climbed to over 43,600 and over 103,000 wounded. Medical reports said that the Israeli occupation forces have committed 5 massacres against families in the Gaza Strip over the last 24 hours, which resulted in the killing of at least 62 Palestinians and the injury of 147 others. Israel's Public Broadcasting Authority has announced that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu intends to push for Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank once Donald Trump officially takes office. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich stated that he has already issued directives to move forward with this plan, expressing hope for its implementation next year. Smotrich referred to 2025 as the year of sovereignty over the West Bank. Egypt has condemned statements by Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich calling for the imposition of Israeli sovereignty and settlement expansion in the West Bank. Egypt stresses that these remarks reflect Israel's rejection of regional peace and its continued policy of arrogance. The country also emphasized the international responsibility to protect the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, particularly their right to self-determination. And for more analysis on this story, we move over to Rehem in our newsroom. Rehem.
Thank you, Hani. To help us analyse the Israeli Finance Minister's statements on the sovereignty call over the West Bank, we're joined from Bethlehem by Kamel Hamid, a Palestinian political analyst. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. Sir, firstly, let's start off by asking what challenges could Israel face internally and externally in imposing sovereignty over the West Bank by 2025? As the Israeli finance minister has called for?
Yes, thank you for hosting us. At the beginning, I can say that this is not a new announcement of minister or prime minister or any leader in Israel. I think the Palestinians, through more than 75 years ago, there were many tens, hundreds, thousands of orders and policies and measurements on the ground from the occupation. So
Okay.
Mr. Smotrich and his government try to send a message for the Palestinians to spread something of fear of for the Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank and all over the world. But I think the Palestinians know this policy very well, and it is nothing new for us. So the Israeli government, of course, will try to do many measurements on the ground to displace the Palestinians, to deportation the Palestinians, to attack the Palestinians, to have many, many obstacles in our life, in the Palestinians' lives, and for the leadership in Palestine. They try also to expand the settlement. They try to have many financial problems, to expand the conflict on the ground, to have many, many arrests for the Palestinians. No, we know all these measurements, but nothing will change our decision to stay and to be in our land and in our homes.
So, sir, I mean, as you said, that the Israeli side is trying to pressure the Palestinian people living in the West Bank and Gaza in general. But in your opinion, what role do you think the international opinion and diplomatic pressure will play in Israel's decision to assert sovereignty over the West Bank? Do you think that the international community as a whole will allow this to happen, or is it something that is just a scare tactic that the Israeli government is using against Palestinians?
If I understand your question, about the continuance of the Israeli measurements on the ground in the future by the end of this year and at the beginning of the next year. They are waiting for the new administration, for the American new administration's Mr. Trump, and they, of course, consider this as a big chance for them to do many things on our plans to annex maybe the West Bank, or to have many colonies or financial measurements on the ground. All these things, the Israeli government, Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir and the others announced many times they will do such things on the ground. And through the first Intifada, we saw the same things by Rabin and the military actions on us, and also in the next Intifada, and also through this very hard struggle between the Palestinians and Arabs in general, with the Israeli government and with this occupation. But as you know, as everybody know, the Palestinians still on their land, on their houses and their homes, even with Gaza
Yes.
destroyed and tried
Yes.
to.
But sir, I mean, do you think that the relationship between the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the United States President-elect Donald Trump may affect U.S. foreign policy in the region, and possibly, you know, encourage further settlements, for instance, or discourage it, and as well as the military support when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? How do you think this dynamic will work when he is in office?
We know Trump is a deal man. We know that he likes to have many deals, and but on the other hand, Trump announced that he will stop the wars in Gaza and in South Lebanon and even in Ukraine. And he doesn't like wars, but he, on the other hand, he has a political deals. We know that Trump announced that Israel is small, it is teeny, it needs more lands and more borders. And we know that they want to expand their borders, even in south of Lebanon, beyond the Litani, or with many areas, maybe Area C and B on West Bank, and of course with Jerusalem. But we know, and Mr. Trump himself knows, he tried before 4 years ago, he tried to have such a deal, but he failed because the Palestinians still on their land. We advise everybody to learn from the history. They have to know, the Palestinians will, and the leadership in Palestine, and our friends and supporters, the peace supporters all over the world. But on other hand, as you know, after 2 months or more, we'll see everything, and the Palestinians is ready for all maybe the things or events or measurements or decisions from the Israeli government or from the new administration in America.
Okay, that was Kamel Hamed, the Palestinian political analyst from Bethlehem. Thank you for your insights and thank you for joining us here on Q News. And now back to you, Hani, in the studio.
Thank you, Raham. UNRWA has warned that famine is imminent in northern Gaza and may be already happening. Senior Emergency Officer for UNRWA in Gaza, Louisa Watridge, said that current provisions for Gazans are not enough. For more than a month, Israeli occupation forces have been pushing deeper into North Gaza, surrounding hospitals and shelters and creating fresh waves of displacement. The Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates has called for the international community to fulfill its responsibilities towards halting Israel's unlawful unilateral actions. In a statement, the ministry emphasized that the international community must take the Israeli declarations about imposing sovereignty over colonies seriously, as these remarks were publicly made and endorsed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The statement further noted that Israel's colonial policies threaten the two-state solution and require immediate action to prevent further regional tensions. Israeli occupation forces have forced hundreds of citizens to forcibly evacuate from shelters in a residential area in the town of Beit Hanun, north of the Gaza Strip, under heavy gunfire and artillery shelling. Palestinian media reported that Israeli army besieged 130 families inside shelters in the town of Beit Hanun and the surrounding houses, and forced those inside to evacuate under gunfire. And now we move to the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين. وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
At Monday's Arab-Islamic Summit in Riyadh, leaders from across the Arab and Islamic world convened to address the deepening humanitarian crisis in Gaza and rising tensions in Lebanon.
At Monday's Arab-Islamic Summit in Riyadh, leaders from Arab and Islamic nations gathered to address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the rising tensions in Lebanon. Hosted by Saudi Arabia, the summit aimed to unify regional responses to end Israeli military actions in Gaza and southern Lebanon, while also promoting diplomatic efforts for the security of both Palestinians and Lebanese. A key focus of the summit was the urgent call for international intervention to protect Palestinian civilians. Leaders urged the United Nations Security Council to condemn humanitarian rights abuses impacting hospitals, essential services, and aid access in Gaza, underscoring the severe humanitarian toll on the population. The summit established a committee to coordinate with international bodies in advancing a two-state solution, recognizing Palestinian statehood as essential to achieving lasting peace. To promote accountability, leaders recommended the formation of legal and media monitoring bodies to document alleged war crimes in Gaza. This documentation would support potential legal action in international courts. The summit further condemned forced displacements and collective punishments, identifying these practices as violations of international law. Additional recommendations included leveraging diplomatic and economic measures to uphold Palestinian rights and ensure accountability. Leaders criticized what they described as double standards in enforcing international law, arguing that such inconsistencies undermine global governance. The Riyadh summit reinforced the commitment of Arab Islamic nations to addressing regional conflicts and fostering stability amid escalating tensions.
Air raid sirens have sounded in Tel Aviv, with the Israeli occupation military saying it had intercepted 3 projectiles fired from Lebanon. Hezbollah said it fired missiles at an airbase near Tel Aviv. Israeli media reported that sirens were also activated at Ben Gurion International Airport, where flights were temporarily halted. Lebanon's Ministry of Public Health has reported that the death toll since the start of the conflict has exceeded 3,280, with over 14,220 individuals injured. The ministry reported that Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon yesterday alone left 44 people dead and 88 wounded. "45 minutes north of Beirut, public schools have opened amidst tens of thousands of internally displaced people who have made some of them a makeshift shelter. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, hundreds of schools in Lebanon were either destroyed or closed due to damage or security concerns. OCHA said the phased plan to resume classes will enroll 175,000 students, including 38,000 displaced children across 350 public schools, which will no longer be used as shelters. Two people have been killed in the town of Nahariya in northern Israel after a warehouse was struck by a rocket fired from Lebanon, according to the Israeli ambulance service. Ambulances arrived at the scene, where a building was left ablaze. The Israeli army said that a barrage of 10 rockets fired from Lebanon was partially intercepted, with the impact felt in several locations.
It gives me great pleasure to declare open the 29th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
COP29 must tear down the walls of climate finance.
Moving to Azerbaijan and the latest updates on the second day of COP29. COP29 is taking place in Baku, Azerbaijan, and is gathering leaders to address global climate challenges. European Union Council President Charles Michel has said that the EU is stepping up climate financing with $31 billion beyond what he said was their fair share. Speaking to leaders at the annual UN Climate Summit, Michel called on countries to follow the EU's example. Nearly 200 nations have gathered at the annual UN Climate Summit, focused this year on raising hundreds of billions of dollars to fund a global transition to cleaner energy sources and limit the climate damage caused by carbon emissions. During the COP29 Climate Action Summit, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan stated that Israeli attacks on Gaza are causing an environmental catastrophe and harming the future of children.
Mevcut hükümet maalesef çocuk, kadın ve yaşlı demeden insanları katletmeyi, büyük bir çevre kıyımına yol açmayı sürdürüyor. İsrail saldırıları nedeniyle toprağa ve yeraltı sularına sızan kimyasallar Gazze'li çocukların geleceğini şimdiden karanlığa bürümüştür.
Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko has called out Western global leaders for not attending the annual United Nations COP29 climate conference. Speaking in the Azerbaijani capital of Baku, Lukashenko spoke in reference to the absence of leaders from the US and France. COP29 has notably lacked major figures, including US President Joe Biden, French President Emmanuel Macron, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Chinese President Xi Jinping, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, among others. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has said that world governments need to tackle climate change to ensure that disasters such as the recent catastrophic flood in Spain's Valencia region do not become more frequent. Speaking at the COP29 summit, Sanchez said the flood in Valencia that killed 220 people would likely not have been as devastating if not for climate change. Sanchez also said middle and working class people would be the most affected by climate change, as seen in Valencia. China has called on countries to increase financial support for developing nations. Delivering a special message at COP29, China's Vice Premier Ding Xinjiang has called on developed countries to increase their ambition in tackling climate change, take the lead in fulfilling emission reduction obligations, and move towards carbon neutrality. Xinjiang added that his country will meet its 2035 nationally determined contributions and will cover all greenhouse gases as drive to achieve carbon neutrality before 2060.
It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Hashim Samitro.
These are all the news we have for now, but here's a recap of the stories we've been covering. The death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip climbs to over 43,600, with over 103,000 wounded. The Lebanese death toll exceeds 3,280, with over 14,220 injured. And European Union Council President says the EU is stepping up its climate financing with $31 billion. This concludes our news bulletin for this hour, but please don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at QNewsEGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.